Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine this. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's a universe unfolding inside your head. Not the vast cosmos above us, but something equally miraculous, your brain, a 3-pound galaxy of neurons, quietly orchestrating everything you are. Let me tell you a story about this extraordinary organ, starting from the very beginning. Your brain weighs approximately 3 pounds, about as much as a small cantaloupe, and yet, this modest weight contains everything you've ever experienced, every memory you hold dear, and every dream you've dared to imagine. It's remarkable, really, that something so light can feel so heavy with meaning. But here's what makes it even more fascinating. Despite representing only about 2% of your body's total weight, your brain demands roughly 20% of your body's energy and oxygen. It's the greediest organ you possess, and for good reason. Think of your brain as a bustling city that never sleeps. Even now, as you rest, as your breathing slows and your muscles relax, your brain is working tirelessly, consuming about 20 watts of power, enough to dimly light a small bulb. This constant hum of activity, this ceaseless consumption of energy, is what keeps you, you. If you could hold a brain in your hands, and some neurosurgeons describe this profound experience, you'd find that it has the consistency of soft tofu or firm gelatin. It's surprisingly delicate, this command center of yours, soft and vulnerable, which is precisely why nature encased it in the fortress of your skull. The brain itself has no pain receptors, a curious evolutionary choice. You could touch the surface of your own brain and feel nothing, though the thought itself might send a shiver down your spine. Now, let's venture deeper into this inner universe. Your brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, those specialized cells that form the very fabric of thought. 86 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than 10 times the number of people on Earth, all packed into the space beneath your skull. Each of these neurons is like a tiny tree, with branches reaching out, seeking connection. And connect they do. Each neuron can form up to 10,000 connections with other neurons, creating a network so vast, so intricate, that the total number of possible neural connections in your brain exceeds the number of atoms in the known universe. Let that sink in for a moment. Your capacity for thought, for creating new patterns and connections, is quite literally cosmic in scale. These neurons communicate through electrical impulses and chemical signals, and they're remarkably fast, though not as fast as you might think. Information travels through your nervous system at speeds varying from about 1 mile per hour in your slowest neurons to over 260 miles per hour in your fastest ones. That might sound quick, but compared to the speed of light, which travels at 186,000 miles per second, your thoughts are practically crawling. Yet somehow, in this relatively slow dance of electrical signals and chemical whispers, consciousness emerges. You emerge. Your brain is divided into 2 hemispheres, left and right, connected by a bundle of about 200 million nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. For many years, people spoke of being left-brained or right-brained, as if creativity and logic lived in separate apartments. The truth, as it often is more beautiful and complex. While certain functions do show some lateralization, language tends to favor the left hemisphere in most people, while spatial awareness leans right. Almost everything you do engages both hemispheres in an intricate dance of collaboration. If you could unfold your brain and smooth out all its wrinkles, those characteristic folds called gyri and sulci, it would cover an area of about 2.5 square feet, roughly the size of a small pillowcase. Nature wrinkled your brain for the same reason we fold a map, to fit more surface area into less space. This wrinkled outer layer, the cerebral cortex, is where much of your higher thinking occurs. It's only about 2 to 4 millimeters thick, about the thickness of 2 stacked credit cards, yet this thin sheet of tissue is where you ponder the universe, compose symphonies, and wonder about the nature of consciousness itself. But your brain isn't just this wrinkled outer layer of sophisticated thought. Deep within, you carry ancient structures, evolutionary gifts from ancestors who swam in prehistoric seas and crawled onto primordial shores. Your brainstem, sitting at the base of your skull where your spine meets your brain, controls the most fundamental functions: breathing, heart rate, sleeping, and waking. It's sometimes called the reptilian brain, a remnant from a time before mammals walked the earth. This ancient core has been keeping creatures alive for hundreds of millions of years, and tonight, as you drift towards sleep, it will keep you breathing, keep your heart beating, faithful as it has been every moment of your life. Wrapped around this ancient core is the limbic system, your emotional center, home to structures with names that sound like poetry: the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus. The amygdala, 2 almond-shaped clusters of neurons, processes your emotions, particularly fear and pleasure. It's your brain's alarm system, constantly scanning for threats, though in our modern world, it sometimes can't tell the difference between a lion and a looming deadline. The hippocampus, named for its resemblance to a seahorse, is your memory maker. Without it, you couldn't form new long-term memories. Everything would be present tense, a perpetual now with no yesterday to anchor you. This small structure, buried deep in your temporal lobes, is quite literally what allows you to have a story, a continuous narrative of self stretching from past into future. Here's something wonderful: a child's brain is more active than an adult's. A toddler's brain uses approximately twice as much energy as an adult brain, burning through glucose at a remarkable rate. This is because young brains are in a state of explosive growth, forming up to 1 million new neural connections every single second. Your brain, in its current form, is the product of millions of years of evolution and your own unique journey through life. Let's continue our journey through this remarkable landscape, exploring the ways your brain grows, changes, and reinvents itself throughout your life. For much of the 20th century, scientists believed that the adult brain was fixed, unchangeable, that you were born with all the neurons you'd ever have, and once childhood ended, your brain became static, like a sculpture set in stone. But they were wrong. Your brain possesses something called neuroplasticity, a quality that transforms it from sculpture into something more like a garden, constantly growing, pruning, reorganizing itself in response to your experiences. Every time you learn something new, a language, a dance step, or route through an unfamiliar city, your brain physically changes. New connections form, existing pathways strengthen, and the very structure of your neural network shifts. In a very real sense, you are not the same person you were yesterday, at least not neurologically. Your brain is being rewritten by your life, one experience at a time, and this rewriting continues until your final day. Even elderly brains in their 80s and 90s, retain this remarkable capacity for change. You are never too old to grow new branches in your inner garden. Now, You might think that memory works like a video camera, recording events precisely and storing them for later playback. But your memory is far stranger and more creative than that. Every time you recall a memory, you're not simply accessing a stored file, you're reconstructing it, and in that reconstruction, you might alter it slightly. Each remembering is actually a kind of remembering, putting the pieces back together in ways that might differ subtly from the last time. This is why eyewitnesses to the same event can have genuinely different memories of what happened, why your childhood memories might shift over the years, becoming simpler, more archetypal, smoothed like river stones by repeated handling. Your brain doesn't preserve the past, it reimagines it, and in doing so, sometimes improves upon it, sometimes distorts it, but always makes it somehow more meaningful, more connected to who you are now. Speaking of memory, let's talk about dreams. You spend roughly 6 years of your life dreaming, 6 entire years in that strange, twilight country where logic loosens and impossibilities bloom like night flowers. During REM sleep, the stage where most vivid dreaming occurs, your brain is actually more active than when you're awake. Blood flow increases, neurons fire in patterns that rival waking consciousness, and yet your body lies paralyzed, mercifully prevented from acting out the adventures unfolding in your mind. Scientists still debate why we dream, but one compelling theory suggests that dreams are your brain's way of processing emotions and consolidating memories, sorting through the day's experiences like a librarian organizing books after closing time. The bizarre narratives, the impossible juxtapositions, your childhood home combined with your current workplace, your long-dead grandmother offering advice about tomorrow's meeting, these might be the visible surface of deep memory processing, your brain making connections, finding patterns, weaving the past into the present in preparation for the future. Here's something that might surprise you: your brain was once larger than it is now. An infant's brain is approximately 1/4 the size of an adult brain, but it grows explosively in those early years. By age 6, a child's brain reaches about 90% of its adult size. But here's the curious part: during adolescence and early adulthood, your brain actually shrinks slightly. This isn't cause for alarm, it's actually a sign of maturation. What's happening is a process called synaptic pruning. Remember those millions of neural connections forming every second in a toddler's brain? Not all of them are useful. During adolescence, your brain eliminates about half of its synapses, keeping the connections you use regularly and discarding those you don't. It's like sculpting, removing marble to reveal the form within. The teenage brain is literally carving itself into its adult shape, which might explain why adolescence is such a turbulent time. The very architecture of thought is being renovated. And this renovation takes longer than you might expect. The prefrontal cortex, the very front portion of your brain, sitting just behind your forehead, doesn't fully mature until your mid to late 20s. This is your brain's executive center, responsible for planning, decision-making, impulse control, and considering long-term consequences. It's the part of you that says maybe we shouldn't do that, while other, older parts of your brain are saying, but it would be so fun. This delayed maturation of the prefrontal cortex explains a great deal about young adulthood, why teenagers and young adults are more prone to risk-taking, why they're more susceptible to peer pressure, why the future sometimes seems less real than the present. They're not being foolish or irresponsible, their brains simply haven't finished building the very structures that make such considerations natural. In a way, Humans spend their first quarter century growing into their own minds. Let's return to something we touched upon earlier, your brain's voracious appetite for energy. Although your brain can store glycogen, it stores very little, meaning it's heavily dependent on a steady supply of glucose from your bloodstream. When blood sugar drops too low, cognitive function suffers. You've probably experienced this, that foggy feeling when you've skipped a meal, the difficulty concentrating, the irritability that comes with hunger. Interestingly, intense mental effort actually burns calories. Chess grandmasters in tournament play can burn up to 6,000 calories per day, simply from the intense cognitive demands of high-level play. Their bodies remain nearly motionless, but their brains work so hard that they burn calories at a rate approaching that of marathon runners. Thinking, truly deep thinking, is not a passive activity. It's physical labor of the most demanding kind, and your brain, that soft 3-pound universe, is the most metabolically active tissue in your body. Your brain didn't evolve in isolation, it evolved for connection. Humans are profoundly social creatures, and this is reflected in our neural architecture. We have specialized brain regions, networks of neurons, dedicated to social cognition, understanding others' emotions, predicting their behavior, recognizing faces, interpreting social cues. When you look at another person's face, particularly their eyes, an intricate dance begins in your brain, rapid and largely unconscious, as you read emotion, intention, trustworthiness. We even have neurons called mirror neurons that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that action. When you watch someone smile, some of the same neurons fire as when you smile yourself. This might be the neural basis of empathy, your brain's way of understanding others by simulating their experiences within yourself. In a very real sense, when you see another person in pain, part of your brain experiences that pain too. We are built for connection, wired for compassion, though the noise of modern life sometimes drowns out these ancient signals. If you speak more than one language, your brain is different from a monolingual brain in measurable ways. Bilingual individuals show increased gray matter density in areas responsible for language processing and executive function. More remarkably, bilingualism appears to offer some protection against cognitive decline and aging. Bilingual individuals, on average, show symptoms of Alzheimer's disease 4 to 5 years later than monolingual individuals. Why? The constant juggling of two languages, choosing the right one, suppressing the other, switching between them, provides a continuous workout for your brain's executive control systems. It's like cross-training for your mind. Even the simple act of being bilingual, requiring no additional effort beyond living your daily life, exercises cognitive functions in ways that build resilience, creating what researchers call cognitive reserve. Your brain becomes, in a sense, more robust, better able to withstand the natural aging process. Here's a thought that might unsettle you, though there's beauty in it too. Your brain has no direct contact with the world. It sits in darkness, in the sealed quiet of your skull, receiving all its information secondhand through electrical signals from your sensory organs. When you look at a sunset, your brain never actually sees the sunset, it only receives patterns of electrical impulses from your eyes, which it then interprets as color, light, and beauty. Everything you experience, the softness of fabric against your skin, the taste of chocolate, the sound of rain, the face of someone you love, all of it is a translation, your brain's best guess about what's happening outside, based on electrical and chemical signals. In a very real sense, you don't experience the world directly, you experience your brain's simulation of the world. And yet, within this simulation, within this darkness that dreams light, you find joy, meaning, connection, love. Your inner world, this construction of neurons and synapses, is the only world you'll ever truly know, and somehow, that's enough. Somehow, it's everything. Your brain, even now, is weaving these words into understanding, adding them to your story. As we journey deeper into understanding this extraordinary organ, let's explore the ways your brain perceives time, creates consciousness, and maintains the delicate balance that keeps you alive. Time, as you experience it, is not constant. You know this already, even if you've never thought about it in these terms. An hour spent waiting in line feels eternal, while an hour with a loved one vanishes like smoke. This isn't just perception, your brain actually processes time differently depending on circumstances. When you're in danger, when adrenaline floods your system, your brain records memories with far greater density, capturing more frames per second, so to speak. Later, when you recall the event, all those extra details make it seem as though time slowed down. This is why a car accident seems to happen in slow motion, why a fall from a height stretches into an eternity. Your brain isn't actually speeding up time perception in the moment, it's creating a richer memory, and that richer memory, when played back, gives the illusion of expanded time. In a way, your brain is a time machine, capable of stretching and compressing your subjective experience of duration, making some moments last forever and letting others slip through your fingers like water. Your brain operates largely through silence. While neurons do communicate through electrical impulses, much of the brain's work happens through chemical neurotransmitters, molecules that drift across the tiny spaces between neurons, called synapses. These spaces are incredibly small, about 20 to 40 nanometers wide, and yet they're where much of you happens. Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, these chemicals, released in quantities measured in molecules, can change your mood, your motivation, your entire experience of being alive. Depression, anxiety, joy, love, all of these states correlate with specific patterns of neurotransmitter activity. When you fall in love, your brain releases dopamine and norepinephrine while actually reducing serotonin to levels similar to those found in obsessive-compulsive disorder, which might explain why new love feels so consuming, so all-encompassing. You are, in a very literal sense, a chemical symphony, and the conductor is this 3-pound organ quietly working away inside your skull, adjusting levels, maintaining balance, creating the felt sense of you. Your brain is remarkably flexible in how it processes sensory information. There are documented cases of blind individuals who have learned to navigate using echolocation, clicking their tongues and listening to the echoes, much like bats or dolphins. Brain scans of these individuals show that their visual cortex, the part of the brain normally dedicated to processing sight, has been repurposed to process auditory information. This reveals something profound. The brain regions we think of as dedicated to specific senses, the visual cortex, the auditory cortex, are perhaps better understood as processing centers that will work with whatever information they receive. Your brain wants to build a model of the world, and it will use whatever tools are available. If one sense is lost, the brain redistributes the territory, ensuring that no neural real estate goes to waste. In some individuals who lose their sight early in life, the visual cortex becomes so attuned to sound and touch that their remaining senses become extraordinarily acute. Blindness creates not just loss, but sometimes a different kind of seeing. Here's something that might change how you think about perception. Your brain doesn't actually show you what's happening right now. There's a delay, a lag between when something happens and when your brain processes it, about 80 milliseconds for visual information, longer for other senses. And yet you don't experience life as a series of delayed reactions. Why? Because your brain is constantly predicting the future. Every moment, your brain takes in information about how things are moving, how situations are developing, and it generates predictions about what will happen next. What you experience as now is actually your brain's best guess about what's happening, based on very recent past information and predictive modeling. When predictions match reality, everything flows smoothly. But when something unexpected happens, when the world violates your brain's predictions, that's when you experience surprise, when time seems to hiccup, when you suddenly become very aware and present. In a sense, you're always living slightly in the future your brain has imagined. You're experiencing not what is, but what your brain predicts is about to be. Speaking of delays, here's something that challenges our understanding of free will. Your brain often makes decisions before you're consciously aware of making them. In famous experiments, researchers found that they could predict which decision a person would make up to several seconds before the person felt they had decided. Brain activity associated with the decision appeared first, and conscious awareness of having made the decision came later. This doesn't necessarily mean free will is an illusion, but it does suggest that consciousness might be more of a narrator than an author, more of a press secretary reporting on decisions than an executive making them. Much of what your brain does happens beneath the surface of awareness, in the vast unconscious territories where most neural processing occurs. Consciousness is like the tip of an iceberg, impressive, visible, but representing only a tiny fraction of what lies beneath. The vast majority of your brain's activity, perhaps 95% or more, happens outside your awareness, in darkness, in silence, keeping you alive and functioning without ever troubling your conscious mind. Your brain doesn't work alone. You have what scientists sometimes call a second brain, the enteric nervous system, a vast network of neurons lining your gastrointestinal tract. This gut brain contains approximately 500 million neurons, more than in your spinal cord, and it can operate independently of your main brain. It produces neurotransmitters, including about 95% of your body's serotonin, that chemical so closely associated with mood and well-being. The connection between your gut and your brain is bidirectional. Your brain sends signals to your gut. Stress can cause stomach aches, anxiety can affect digestion. But your gut also sends signals to your brain, influencing mood, emotion, even decision-making. Those gut feelings you experience aren't just metaphors. There's a real communication happening, a conversation between the brain in your skull and the brain in your belly. When you feel butterflies in your stomach, when anxiety ties your stomach in knots, that's this ancient connection at work, these two nervous systems speaking in their chemical language. Your brain is both fragile and remarkably resilient. We've all heard stories of people who've survived devastating injuries, strokes, accidents, tumors, and recovered functions that doctors thought were lost forever. This is neuroplasticity at its most dramatic. When one part of the brain is damaged, other parts can sometimes take over its functions, remapping themselves, learning new tasks. There are cases of people who've had entire hemispheres of their brains removed, a procedure called hemispherectomy, sometimes necessary to control severe epilepsy, and yet they go on to live relatively normal lives. Children are especially adaptable. A child who loses an entire hemisphere can often develop near-normal language, motor, and cognitive functions as the remaining hemisphere compensates. The younger the brain, the more plastic it is, the more capable of rewiring itself in response to injury. But even adult brains, even aging brains, retain some of this remarkable capacity for reorganization and recovery. Your brain wants to work, wants to function, and it will find ways to do so, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable damage. Earlier, we mentioned that your brain uses about 20% of your body's oxygen. But here's the critical detail. Your brain can only survive about 5 to 6 minutes without oxygen before irreversible damage begins to occur. Neurons are extraordinarily energy hungry, and without a constant supply of oxygenated blood, they begin to die. This is why stroke is such a medical emergency. Every minute matters. When blood flow to part of the brain is blocked, neurons in that region begin dying at a rate of about 1.9 million per minute. Time is brain, as neurologists say. And yet, your circulatory system is exquisitely designed to prioritize your brain. In situations of blood loss or low blood pressure, your body will constrict blood vessels to your extremities, your digestive system, even your muscles, to ensure that your brain receives what it needs. Your body knows, you can survive without a hand, without a stomach, even without a heart with artificial support, but you cannot survive without your brain. Everything else is negotiable, your brain is essential. Your brain's chemistry changes throughout the day in predictable patterns. Cortisol, often called the stress hormone, peaks in the early morning, helping you wake up and face the day. As evening approaches, your pineal gland, a tiny pine cone-shaped structure deep in your brain, begins producing melatonin, the hormone that makes you feel sleepy. This circadian rhythm, this internal clock, is regulated by a cluster of about 20,000 neurons in your hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. These neurons receive information directly from your eyes about light levels, helping to keep your internal clock synchronized with the external day-night cycle. When you travel across time zones, when you work night shifts, when you stare at bright screens late into the night, you're disrupting this ancient rhythm, confusing these neurons that have been tracking the sun for millions of years of evolutionary history. Your brain craves rhythm, pattern, the regular cycle of waking and sleeping, and when that rhythm is disrupted, everything suffers: mood, memory, immune function, even your metabolism. You are a creature of rhythms, and your brain is the keeper of time. Finally, let's talk about one of your brain's most important features, one you probably never think about: the blood-brain barrier. This is a specialized network of tightly packed cells lining your brain's blood vessels, acting as a highly selective filter. It allows oxygen, glucose, and certain other necessary molecules to pass through while blocking most toxins, bacteria, and potentially harmful substances. This barrier is both blessing and curse. It protects your brain from infections and toxins that would be devastating to such delicate tissue. But it also makes treating brain diseases incredibly difficult. Many drugs that could potentially help neurological conditions can't cross this barrier. It's like having a moat around a castle. It keeps enemies out, but it also makes it harder for friendly forces to enter. Your brain, in its wisdom or perhaps its paranoia, has chosen isolation over accessibility, protection over openness. It sits behind its barrier, in its fortress of bone, in its darkness, processing the world at a distance, forever protected, forever alone, forever creating the only reality you'll ever know. And even now, as these facts settle into your understanding, your brain is working, weaving, making meaning from sound. As we continue our exploration, let's discover how your brain creates the experience of self, how it learns and remembers, and the remarkable ways it continues to surprise even those who study it most closely. For decades, scientists believed that you were born with all the neurons you would ever have, and that the slow loss of these neurons was an inevitable part of aging. But in the 1990s, researchers discovered something extraordinary. Your brain can actually create new neurons throughout your entire life, a process called neurogenesis. This happens primarily in two regions, the hippocampus, your memory center, and the olfactory bulb, which processes smell. Every day, even as you age, a few thousand new neurons are born in your hippocampus. They migrate to where they're needed, integrate into existing networks, and begin their work. Exercise promotes neurogenesis. So does learning new things, spending time in enriching environments, even getting adequate sleep. Depression and chronic stress, conversely, can suppress it. This means that, in a very real sense, you have some control over your brain's regeneration. The choices you make, to move your body, to learn something new, to manage stress, to sleep well, these choices influence whether your brain grows new cells or not. You are not a passenger in your own neural development, you are an active participant, a gardener tending the growth of new life in your inner landscape. Your brain receives approximately 11 million bits of sensory information every single second. 11 million. Light waves hitting your retinas, air molecules vibrating your eardrums, pressure sensors in your skin firing, chemical receptors in your nose and tongue activating. It's an overwhelming flood of data. And yet, your conscious mind can only process about 40 to 50 bits per second. Think about that extraordinary ratio. Of the 11 million bits available, you're aware of only 40 or 50. Your brain is performing an act of radical filtering, of ruthless prioritization, deciding what deserves your attention and what to ignore. This is why you can be so focused on a conversation that you don't hear someone calling your name. This is why you can drive a familiar route and arrive with no memory of the journey. Your brain decided the information wasn't important enough to bother your conscious mind with. In every moment, you're experiencing an infinitesimally small slice of reality, and your brain is the editor deciding what makes the cut. The world you experience is not the world as it is, but the world as your brain has chosen to show you, a carefully curated exhibition of reality, selected from millions of possibilities. Memories are not stored evenly throughout your brain. Emotional memories, moments of intense joy, fear, love, or trauma, are encoded differently and more deeply than mundane experiences. This is because the amygdala, your emotion center, works closely with the hippocampus during emotionally charged events, essentially telling your brain, this is important. Remember this. This is why you can recall exactly where you were on certain significant days, personal or historical, while you can't remember what you had for lunch last Tuesday. Your brain knows that emotions signal importance, that feelings are information about what matters. A memory tied to strong emotion is a memory wrapped in significance, and your brain preserves these more carefully than it preserves the routine and ordinary. But here's the curious part. While emotional memories are more vivid and persistent, they're not necessarily more accurate. The same intensity that makes them feel real, that gives them their power, can also make them more susceptible to distortion. Strong emotion is like a bright light. It illuminates, but it can also create shadows, blind spots, places where details get lost in the glare. Your most powerful memories, the ones that feel most true, might be the ones you've reshaped most through repeated remembering. Language changes your brain's physical structure. When you learn to read, networks of neurons that evolved for other purposes, recognizing faces, detecting patterns, get repurposed for decoding written symbols. Brain scans show that literate and illiterate individuals have measurably different brain organization. The act of learning to read actually rewires your visual system. And it's not just literacy. The language you speak shapes how your brain is organized. Speakers of tonal languages like Mandarin show different patterns of brain activity when processing speech than speakers of non-tonal languages. People who speak languages with complex grammatical gender systems develop different neural processing patterns than those who don't. Language doesn't just allow you to express your thoughts, it actually shapes the architecture through which you think. Even more remarkably, learning a language in childhood versus adulthood activates different brain regions. Children learning language use more diffuse, widespread brain areas, while adults learning new languages rely more heavily on specific regions associated with conscious, effortful processing. A child acquiring language is growing their brain around it. An adult is squeezing new information into an already established structure. Both succeed, but the neural journey is entirely different. We mentioned earlier that the brain itself has no pain receptors. But here's the unsettling extension of that fact. Headaches, which feel like they're happening in your brain, are actually occurring in the tissues surrounding your brain, the meninges, blood vessels, muscles, and nerves of your scalp and neck. Your brain can feel pain from everywhere else in your body, but it cannot feel its own pain. This creates a strange paradox. The organ responsible for processing all pain, for creating the subjective experience of hurting, is itself immune to pain. It's like a radio that receives every station except the one broadcasting from inside itself. And yet, chronic pain, pain that persists long after an injury has healed, is, in many cases, a creation of the brain itself. The brain can generate pain signals even when there's no physical injury, a phenomenon called central sensitization. Your brain, trying to protect you, can become overprotective, seeing threats where none exist, creating suffering in its attempt to prevent it. While you sleep, something remarkable happens. Your brain shrinks slightly, its cells actually contract by about 60%, creating more space between them. During this time, cerebrospinal fluid flows through these expanded spaces, washing away metabolic waste that has accumulated during the day. It's like your brain has a janitorial service that only comes out at night. One of the substances cleared away is beta amyloid, a protein that, when it accumulates, is associated with Alzheimer's disease. This might be one reason why chronic sleep deprivation is linked to increased risk of dementia. Your brain never gets the deep cleaning it needs. Sleep is not merely rest, not just a passive shutdown of systems. It's an active process of maintenance and repair, as essential to your brain's health as food and water. When you skimp on sleep, you're not just tired, you're literally allowing waste to accumulate in your brain, toxins that could, over time, damage the very neurons you depend on for thought and memory. Some of humanity's greatest insights have come not through deliberate, conscious effort, but through moments of relaxation, dreams, or sudden inspiration. The structure of the benzene molecule came to chemist August Kekulé in a dream. Paul McCartney heard the melody for Yesterday in a dream so vivid he thought he must have unconsciously plagiarized it. There's a reason we tell people to sleep on it when facing difficult decisions. Your unconscious mind, that vast territory of neural processing happening beneath awareness, is extraordinarily good at making connections, seeing patterns, solving problems that stump your conscious mind. When you stop actively trying to solve a problem, when you let your mind wander or fall asleep, your brain doesn't stop working. Instead, it shifts into a different mode, one where unusual connections can form, where distant concepts can collide and create something new. This is why shower thoughts feel so profound, why long walks often lead to breakthroughs, why the answer sometimes comes to you the moment you give up searching for it. Your conscious mind is like a spotlight, focused and intense but narrow. Your unconscious is like ambient light, dimmer but illuminating everything at once, capable of seeing relationships your conscious spotlight would never find. Creativity requires both, the focused attention to work on a problem, and the diffuse awareness to let solutions emerge from unexpected directions. Loneliness isn't just an emotional state, it has measurable effects on your brain's structure and function. Chronic social isolation is associated with increased inflammation in the brain, decreased volume in certain brain regions, and changes in neurotransmitter systems. In some ways, the brain experiences prolonged loneliness as a form of chronic stress, triggering the same physiological responses as other threats to well-being. This makes evolutionary sense. For most of human history, being separated from your social group was life-threatening. A human alone was a human unlikely to survive. So your brain treats social disconnection as an emergency, sounding alarms, creating discomfort, motivating you to seek reconnection. In our modern world, where physical survival rarely depends on group membership, this ancient alarm can seem disproportionate. But your brain doesn't know you can survive alone, it only knows the lessons of millions of years of evolution, which say, connect or perish. Conversely, strong social connections, meaningful relationships, and regular social engagement are associated with better cognitive function and aging, reduced risk of dementia, and even increased longevity. Your brain is healthiest when it's connecting with other brains, when it's engaging in that ancient dance of social interaction that made us human in the first place. Your brain can learn to integrate completely new senses. In experimental settings, people have been fitted with devices that translate information into a form their existing senses can process. A device that converts visual information into patterns of vibration on the tongue can allow blind individuals to see through touch. Within a remarkably short time, sometimes just hours, people report that the sensations stop feeling like touch and start feeling like a new form of perception, something not quite vision but not quite touch either. This reveals something profound about sensory experience. What we call sight or touch or hearing might be less about the sense organs themselves and more about patterns of information arriving at the brain. If the brain receives structured, meaningful patterns, regardless of which sense organ they came from, it can learn to interpret them, to weave them into your experience of reality. Your brain is building a model of the world, and it's surprisingly flexible about what building materials it will accept. As you age, your brain changes, but not always in the ways you might expect. While it's true that processing speed slows and certain types of memory become less reliable, other cognitive abilities can actually improve with age. Vocabulary, general knowledge, and what researchers call crystallized intelligence, the ability to use accumulated knowledge and experience, often continue to improve well into your 60s and 70s. Older brains also show something called bilateral recruitment. When performing tasks that young brains handle with one hemisphere, older brains often activate both hemispheres. This isn't a sign of decline, it's compensation, your aging brain finding new strategies to maintain performance. It's like an experienced worker who, finding one tool less effective than it used to be, simply picks up another tool to complete the job. Your brain remains adaptive, resourceful, continuing to find ways to accomplish what needs accomplishing, even as the terrain changes. And here's something beautiful: older adults often report greater emotional well-being than younger adults, despite, or perhaps because of, their awareness of time's passage. The aging brain seems to shift its priorities, paying more attention to positive information, finding more satisfaction in simple pleasures, letting go of what doesn't matter. Wisdom, it turns out, might not be just accumulated knowledge. It might be the brain's gradual refinement of what deserves attention, what merits concern, what brings joy. Let us continue exploring the mysteries of your brain, venturing into the territories of consciousness, perception, and the extraordinary ways your mind navigates the world. Color doesn't exist outside your brain. This might sound strange, but it's true. What exists in the world are electromagnetic waves of different lengths. Some of these waves, when they strike your retinas, trigger a cascade of chemical and electrical events that your brain interprets as color. But the redness of red, the blueness of blue, these are creations of your mind, not properties of light itself. In fact, a significant portion of the population experiences color differently. About 8% of men and 0.5% of women have some form of color vision deficiency, often called color blindness, where certain colors appear identical or muted. But here's what's fascinating: people with typical color vision don't all experience color identically either. The red you see might be subtly different from the red someone else sees, and we'd never know, because we've all learned to call that experience red. Even more remarkably, some rare individuals, mostly women, are tetrachromats, possessing 4 types of color receptors instead of the usual 3. These people can distinguish subtle color variations that most of us cannot even perceive. They live in a more colorful world than the rest of us, seeing distinctions we're blind to, experiencing hues that don't exist in our subjective reality. Your experience of color, that seemingly simple sensation, is actually a complex construction, unique to your brain, possibly unlike anyone else's experience, and yet somehow you all agree to call the sky blue. Music activates more areas of your brain simultaneously than almost any other activity. When you listen to music, regions responsible for auditory processing, emotion, memory, motor control, and even language all light up in intricate patterns. This is why music can trigger such powerful memories, why a song can transport you instantly to another time and place. Music isn't processed in one location but distributed throughout your brain, woven into multiple systems. For musicians, especially those who began training in childhood, the brain shows remarkable structural differences. The corpus callosum, that bridge between hemispheres we mentioned earlier, is often larger in musicians. The auditory cortex is more developed. Areas responsible for fine motor control are expanded. Learning music doesn't just teach you a skill, it physically reshapes your brain's architecture. And here's something beautiful: music can reach people even when other forms of communication fail. Patients with advanced Alzheimer's disease who can no longer recognize their own children may still sing along to songs from their youth. The musical memories, distributed so widely throughout the brain, seem more resilient than other memories, lasting almost until the very end. Music, in some profound sense, is one of the deepest languages your brain speaks, one of the last it forgets. Your brain maintains a detailed map of your body, a representation of where your limbs are, what position they're in, what they're touching. This is called proprioception, and it's so fundamental to your experience that you rarely notice it. But when something disrupts this map, the results can be startling. People who lose limbs often experience phantom limb syndrome, sensations, even pain, in the missing body part. What's happening is that the brain's map of the body doesn't immediately update when a limb is lost. The neurons responsible for processing sensation from that limb are still there, still active, and without actual input from the limb, they sometimes generate their own signals, creating the sensation of a limb that no longer exists. Your brain is so committed to its model of your body that it continues to maintain that model even when reality has changed. But here's where it gets stranger: experiments with mirrors can sometimes relieve phantom limb pain. By positioning a mirror so the reflection of the remaining limb appears where the missing limb should be, patients can see the phantom limb move and relax. The visual information is powerful enough to update the brain's body map, relieving pain in a limb that doesn't exist. Your brain's model of reality can be updated through illusion, through carefully constructed fiction, demonstrating just how much of your experience is interpretation rather than direct perception. When you practice a skill, playing an instrument, typing, performing a surgical procedure, something remarkable happens in your brain. Initially, the activity requires intense conscious attention and activates widespread brain areas. But with practice, the activity becomes more efficient, more automatic, requiring less conscious oversight. This is because repeated practice leads to a process called myelination. Myelin is a fatty substance that wraps around nerve fibers, insulating them like the coating on electrical wires. This insulation allows signals to travel much faster, up to 100 times faster than unmyelinated neurons. When you practice something repeatedly, your brain responds by adding more myelin to the neural pathways involved in that skill. The signal becomes faster, stronger, more reliable. This is what people mean when they talk about muscle memory, though the memory isn't in your muscles at all. It's in the strengthened, myelinated pathways in your brain. This is why early practice is so valuable, why childhood is such a powerful time for learning. Young brains are myelinating rapidly, and skills learned in this period become deeply embedded. But it's also why you can teach an old dog new tricks, myelination continues throughout life, though more slowly. Every time you practice, every time you repeat an action or rehearse a piece of information, you're sending a message to your brain: this matters, strengthen these pathways, wrap them in myelin, make this easier next time. Your left hemisphere contains what neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga calls the interpreter, a system that constantly generates explanations for your behavior, even when it doesn't actually know why you did something. Studies with split-brain patients, individuals whose corpus callosum has been severed, revealed this dramatically. In these patients, the two hemispheres cannot communicate with each other. Researchers could show information to just one hemisphere. When they showed the right hemisphere an instruction to stand up, the patient would stand. When asked why they stood up, the left hemisphere, which controls speech but hadn't seen the instruction, would immediately generate a plausible explanation: I wanted to stretch, or I was going to get a drink. The left hemisphere wasn't lying. It genuinely believed its explanation. It saw the behavior, standing up, and immediately created a story to make sense of it, unaware that the actual cause was something it hadn't perceived. This happens in all of us, every day. We do things for reasons we're not fully aware of, influences from our unconscious, from emotions we haven't articulated, from stimuli we didn't consciously notice, and then our interpreter creates a coherent narrative, a story about why we chose what we chose, decided what we decided. You are, in some sense, a storyteller, constantly narrating yourself to yourself, creating the illusion of a unified, comprehensible self out of the complex, often contradictory workings of your various brain systems. Your brain dedicates a disproportionate amount of processing power to your face and hands. In the motor cortex, the strip of brain tissue responsible for controlling movement, and in the sensory cortex, which processes touch, the representation of your body parts is wildly out of proportion to their actual size. If you drew a human figure with body parts sized according to how much brain tissue they occupy, you'd get something called a cortical homunculus, a grotesque little creature with enormous hands and lips, a huge tongue, tiny torso and legs. This allocation of brain resources reflects what matters for survival and social interaction. Your hands allow you to manipulate your environment with extraordinary precision. Your face and lips allow you to communicate, to express emotion, to eat and speak. The 43 muscles in your face can create thousands of distinct expressions, generating a vocabulary of emotion that others can read, often unconsciously. Your face is, in many ways, a direct window into your brain's emotional states, and other people's brains are exquisitely tuned to read that window. Interestingly, facial expressions aren't just outputs, they're also inputs. Studies show that holding your face in certain expressions can actually influence your emotional state, a phenomenon called facial feedback. Force yourself to smile, truly smile with your eyes as well as your mouth, and you're likely to feel slightly happier. Your brain reads your facial muscles and updates its model of your emotional state accordingly. The relationship between brain and face is bidirectional, a constant conversation between inner experience and outer expression. Deep within your brain, various oscillations pulse like drums, keeping different tempos. These brain waves, patterns of synchronized neural activity, vary in frequency and are associated with different states of consciousness. Delta waves, the slowest, dominate in deep sleep. Theta waves are associated with drowsiness and meditation. Alpha waves appear during relaxed, wakeful states. Beta waves accompany active thinking and focus. Gamma waves, the fastest, are linked to higher-level cognitive processing. But these aren't just correlates of mental states, they appear to be fundamental to how your brain operates. Different brain regions need to synchronize their activity to work together, like musicians in an orchestra finding a common tempo. These oscillations may be the mechanism by which distant brain regions coordinate, creating the unified experience of consciousness from disparate neural processes. When these rhythms become disrupted, problems emerge. Epilepsy is essentially a storm of abnormal synchronization, neurons firing together when they shouldn't. Sleep disorders often involve disrupted brainwave patterns. Even conditions like ADHD and schizophrenia show altered oscillatory patterns. Your brain is, among other things, an orchestra of rhythms, and health depends on all the sections playing in harmony, each rhythm emerging at the right time, creating together the symphony of your conscious experience. When you perceive a threat, physical or psychological, a tiny almond-shaped structure called the amygdala triggers a cascade of responses throughout your brain and body. The hypothalamus activates your sympathetic nervous system. Your adrenal glands release adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart rate increases, your breathing quickens, your pupils dilate, and blood flows to your muscles. This is the fight-or-flight response, an ancient survival mechanism. But here's the problem, your amygdala can't distinguish between a lion and a looming deadline, between a physical threat and a social embarrassment. It triggers the same response for modern stressors that it would for mortal danger. And while this response is adaptive in the short term, giving you energy and focus to handle a crisis, chronic activation causes serious damage. Prolonged stress exposure leads to elevated cortisol levels, which can damage the hippocampus, impairing memory formation. It disrupts sleep. It weakens the immune system. It even shrinks the prefrontal cortex while enlarging the amygdala, making you more reactive and less able to regulate emotions, essentially rewiring your brain to be more anxious. Chronic stress doesn't just feel bad, it physically changes your brain's structure in ways that make stress harder to manage, creating a vicious cycle. Learning to manage stress isn't just about feeling better in the moment, it's about protecting your brain's architecture for the long term. Your brain cannot actually multitask in the way you probably think it can. When you believe you're doing two things at once, what you're actually doing is rapidly switching attention between them. And each switch comes with a cost, a brief moment where your brain has to reorient, remember where it was, and reload the context of the new task. These attention switches, repeated hundreds of times throughout a day, create what researchers call switching costs. Studies consistently show that people who multitask perform worse at both tasks than people who focus on one thing at a time. They make more errors, retain less information, and take longer overall. The sense of productivity you feel when juggling multiple tasks is an illusion. You're actually less productive, but the constant switching creates a feeling of busyness that your brain mistakes for effectiveness. There is one exception: you can combine an automatic task with a conscious task. You can walk and talk because walking has become automatic, requiring little conscious attention. But try to hold a complex conversation while solving a difficult math problem, and both suffer. Your conscious attention is a spotlight, not a floodlight. It can only truly illuminate one thing at a time. Dividing it divides its power, leaving everything dimmer than it would be if you gave it your full focus. Practicing gratitude, deliberately focusing on things you're thankful for, produces measurable changes in your brain. Regular gratitude practice increases activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, an area associated with learning and decision-making, and in regions associated with reward and emotional regulation. It also appears to increase the neurotransmitter dopamine and serotonin activity. Over time, grateful thinking seems to create a positive feedback loop. The more you practice noticing what's good in your life, the more your brain becomes attuned to positive information, the more readily you notice things to be grateful for. It's like training a muscle, but the muscle is a pattern of attention, a habit of noticing. Your brain physically rewires itself around what you repeatedly focus on. This isn't about denying negative experiences or forcing false positivity. It's about balance. Your brain has a negativity bias, an evolutionary adaptation that made your ancestors attend carefully to threats. But in the modern world, this bias can become overwhelming, focusing attention exclusively on problems, dangers, and disappointments. Gratitude practice doesn't eliminate the negative, it simply ensures the positive isn't ignored, that beauty and goodness get their share of your brain's limited attention. It's a choice about what kind of brain you want to grow, what patterns you want to strengthen through the precious resource of your attention. And so your brain continues, this moment and the next, building itself through experience, through focus, through the choices you make about where to direct the light of your awareness. As we drift deeper into understanding, let's explore the mysteries of how your brain constructs reality, how it heals, and the remarkable ways it connects you to everything around you. When you read these words, something extraordinary is happening in your brain that no other animal can do. Reading is such a recent invention in human history, only about 5,000 years old, that we haven't evolved specialized brain structures for it. Instead, your brain has repurposed older systems, creating what neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene calls neuronal recycling. The region of your brain that processes written words, called the visual word form area, originally evolved to recognize faces and objects. Over the years of learning to read, these neurons were gradually retrained, their ancient pattern recognition abilities redirected toward decoding abstract symbols. And here's what's remarkable, this region is located in almost exactly the same spot in every person's brain who learns to read, regardless of what language they're reading or what writing system they use, alphabetic, logographic, syllabic. When you read fluently, you're not sounding out letters or consciously processing words. The recognition happens so quickly, so automatically, that you can't not read words you see. Try looking at a word in your native language and seeing it as merely shapes rather than meaning. You'll find it nearly impossible. Your brain has been so thoroughly trained that reading has become as automatic as recognizing a face, the neural pathways so well established that meaning arrives before conscious effort begins. Sleep isn't just one state but a complex cycle of different stages, each with its own purpose. During REM sleep, when most vivid dreaming occurs, your brain is highly active, almost as active as when you're awake, but it's chemically different from waking consciousness. One key difference, norepinephrine, a stress-related neurotransmitter, is almost completely absent during REM sleep. Some researchers believe this creates a safe space for your brain to process emotional memories without the physiological stress response. You can revisit difficult experiences, work through emotional challenges, all while your body remains calm, your stress response temporarily offline. Dreams might be your brain's therapy session, a time when you can encounter your fears, your desires, your unresolved tensions in a context where they can't harm you. This is why REM sleep deprivation is so psychologically damaging. People deprived of REM sleep show increased emotional reactivity, difficulty regulating emotions, and symptoms resembling anxiety and depression. Your brain needs this dreaming time, this strange twilight processing, not as luxury but as necessity. Dreams aren't meaningless noise. They're your brain doing essential maintenance on your emotional life, filing away memories, softening their sharp edges, integrating experience into understanding. Your brain is exquisitely sensitive to temperature. It operates optimally within a very narrow range, roughly 97 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Even small deviations affect cognitive function. When your core body temperature rises just a few degrees, as in a fever, thinking becomes foggy, concentration wavers, and confusion can set in. This is because many of the biochemical processes your neurons depend on are temperature sensitive. Interestingly, your brain has its own cooling system. The blood vessels in your scalp, particularly those near the surface, help dissipate heat. The sinuses in your skull may also function partly as cooling chambers. And when you're too hot, blood vessels in your brain dilate to increase blood flow and cooling, which is one reason why heat can trigger headaches in some people. Those dilated blood vessels irritate surrounding tissues. Your brain even regulates its own temperature somewhat independently from the rest of your body. During intense mental activity, your brain's temperature can rise slightly due to increased metabolism. During sleep, it cools down. These subtle temperature fluctuations are part of the complex dance of circadian rhythms, hormonal cycles, and metabolic processes that keep your brain functioning optimally, maintaining the precise conditions necessary for consciousness to emerge. You yawn, and it's such a simple, universal experience that you probably don't think about it. But yawning remains one of neuroscience's delightful mysteries. The common belief that you yawn because you need oxygen has been largely disproven. Studies show that breathing extra oxygen doesn't reduce yawning, and breathing less doesn't increase it. Current theories suggest yawning might be a way to cool your brain. The deep intake of air, the stretching of the jaw, the increased blood flow, all of these might help regulate brain temperature. Another theory proposes that yawning increases alertness, briefly boosting blood flow and stimulating the brain when attention starts to wane. It's a reset button, preparing your brain for a change in state. What's truly fascinating is that yawning is contagious, and not just among humans. Dogs yawn when their owners yawn. Chimpanzees catch yawns from each other. Even reading about yawning right now might trigger the urge. This contagion appears to be linked to empathy and social bonding, mediated by those mirror neurons we discussed earlier. Your brain, seeing another brain's signal of state change, unconsciously mimics it, a subtle form of social synchronization that binds groups together through shared physiological rhythms. Your brain is designed to forget. This might seem like a flaw, but it's actually essential. German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered what's now called the forgetting curve. Without reinforcement, you forget approximately 50% of new information within an hour, and about 70% within 24 hours. This rapid forgetting might seem wasteful, but imagine the alternative, remembering everything you've ever experienced with perfect clarity. Your brain would be overwhelmed, unable to identify what's important, unable to extract patterns from the noise. Forgetting is a feature, not a bug. It allows your brain to focus on what matters, what recurs, what proves useful over time. Information that you encounter repeatedly, that you actively use or deliberately review, gets strengthened, moved from temporary storage in the hippocampus to more permanent storage in the cortex. But information encountered once and never revisited fades away, making room for new experiences. This is why spaced repetition is so effective for learning. By reviewing information at gradually increasing intervals, just before you're about to forget it, you signal to your brain that this information is important, worth keeping. You're not fighting against your brain's tendency to forget, you're working with it, using forgetting as a filter that ensures what remains is what truly matters. Your brain's expectations can literally change your physiology. This is the placebo effect, and it's far more powerful than most people realize. When you believe you've received pain medication, even if it's just a sugar pill, your brain releases endogenous opioids, your body's natural painkillers. The expectation of relief creates actual biochemical changes that produce relief. Brain imaging studies show that placebos activate the same neural pathways as real medications. In some studies, placebos have proven nearly as effective as actual drugs for conditions ranging from pain to depression to Parkinson's disease. This isn't all in your head in the dismissive sense, it's all in your head in the most literal sense. Your head, your brain, has the power to alter your body's chemistry based on belief and expectation. But there's a shadow side too, the nocebo effect. Negative expectations can produce negative outcomes. Tell someone a harmless substance might cause headaches, and a significant percentage will develop headaches. Your brain's power to heal through expectation is matched by its power to harm through fear or negative belief. You are, in a very real sense, constantly engaged in a form of self-suggestion, your beliefs and expectations subtly shaping your physiology, for better or worse. For most people, senses remain distinct, sounds are sounds, colors are colors, tastes are tastes. But for about 4% of the population, sensory experiences blend in unexpected ways. This is synesthesia, a condition where stimulation of one sense consistently triggers experiences in another. Some synesthetes see colors when they hear music. Others taste shapes, or associate specific colors with letters and numbers. Synesthesia appears to result from increased crosstalk between normally separate sensory processing regions. It's often hereditary and usually emerges in early childhood. For synesthetes, these blended perceptions aren't metaphorical, they're as real as any other sensory experience. A synesthete who associates the number 5 with the color blue doesn't just think of them together, they actually perceive blueness when encountering 5. This reveals something profound about perception. Your brain's separation of senses into distinct categories isn't as fundamental as it seems. At deep levels, all sensory information is just patterns of neural activity. The brain interprets these patterns and assigns them to different experiential categories, but the boundaries between categories are somewhat arbitrary, maintained by most brains but occasionally blurred in others. Synesthesia offers a glimpse of how flexible, how constructed, your sensory reality truly is. Adolescence is often portrayed as a time of reckless behavior and poor decisions, but your brain is actually undergoing one of the most important transformations of your life during these years. The prefrontal cortex is being refined through synaptic pruning, strengthening important connections while eliminating others. But there's an asymmetry in development. The limbic system, your emotional and reward centers, matures earlier than the prefrontal cortex, your judgment and impulse control center. This creates what some researchers call the maturational gap. Adolescents feel emotions intensely and find rewards particularly compelling, but their capacity to regulate those emotions and consider long-term consequences is still developing. It's not that teenagers don't understand risk, it's that their brains are wired to find rewards more rewarding and to be more influenced by peers during this developmental window. But this seeming vulnerability has an evolutionary purpose. Adolescence is when humans historically left their family groups, formed new relationships, explored new territories. The heightened reward sensitivity and peer orientation motivate young people to seek novelty, take chances, form bonds beyond their family. It's a feature designed for a specific life stage, leaving the nest, becoming independent. The teenage brain isn't broken, it's adapted for a specific developmental task, even if that adaptation sometimes creates challenges in modern environments. Regular meditation produces measurable changes in brain structure and function. Long-term meditators show increased thickness in brain regions associated with attention and sensory processing. They show increased connectivity between brain regions and altered activity in the default mode network, the brain system active when you're not focused on the outside world, often associated with mind-wandering and self-referential thought. Meditation isn't just relaxation. It's a form of brain training. Different meditation practices train different mental capacities. Focused attention meditation, where you concentrate on a single object like the breath, strengthens attention networks. Open monitoring meditation, where you observe thoughts and sensations without judgment, affects emotional regulation systems. Compassion meditation activates brain networks involved in empathy and positive emotion. Even relatively brief meditation practice, 8 weeks of daily meditation for about 30 minutes, produces detectable changes in brain structure. Your brain responds to mental training the same way muscles respond to physical training. The concentrated, repeated practice of specific mental states literally reshapes neural architecture. You can, through deliberate mental practice, sculpt your own brain, strengthening the capacities you choose to develop, whether that's attention, equanimity, compassion, or awareness itself. Your brain doesn't operate in isolation from the rest of your body. And recent research has revealed a surprising connection. The trillions of bacteria living in your gut, your microbiome, can influence your brain and behavior. These microorganisms produce neurotransmitters and other signaling molecules. They communicate with your brain through the vagus nerve, through the immune system, through metabolic byproducts that enter your bloodstream. Studies have shown that the composition of gut bacteria can influence mood, anxiety, even cognitive function. Mice raised without any gut bacteria show altered brain chemistry and abnormal stress responses. In humans, changes in the microbiome have been associated with depression, anxiety, and even conditions like autism and Parkinson's disease, though the exact causal relationships are still being unraveled. This means that when you eat, you're not just feeding yourself, you're feeding trillions of microorganisms whose metabolism affects your brain. The food choices you make alter the composition of your microbiome, which in turn influences your mental state. You are not a single organism but a complex ecosystem, and your consciousness emerges not just from neurons but from the interactions between your brain, your body, and the countless microscopic lives that share your existence. You are, quite literally, never alone inside your own skin. And so your brain continues its quiet work, connecting, processing, creating the seamless experience of being you, moment after moment, breath after breath. As our journey through the landscape of your mind continues, let us explore the boundaries of consciousness, the ways your brain constructs identity, and the remarkable resilience hidden within its delicate structures. There's a peculiar gap in your experience of time that you've never noticed, a strange discontinuity that your brain smoothly papers over. When you decide to move your hand and then move it, you experience these as simultaneous, decision and action, intention and execution, happening in one unified moment. But they're not. The decision to move occurs in your brain about 200 milliseconds before you become consciously aware of having made that decision. Researcher Benjamin Libet discovered this unsettling fact through experiments measuring brain activity. The readiness potential, a buildup of electrical activity associated with preparing to move, begins before you feel you've decided to move. Your brain has already committed to the action before you consciously choose it. This raises profound questions about free will, about the nature of choice, about who's really in control. But perhaps the question itself is framed wrong. Perhaps consciousness isn't the executive making decisions but rather the experiencer becoming aware of decisions already made by unconscious processes. You aren't separate from your brain, after all. Those unconscious processes are still you, just parts of you that don't report to conscious awareness. The conscious you is like the president giving a press conference, announcing decisions, while the vast machinery of government, the real work of neurons and networks, operates behind the scenes, unseen but essential. Different languages carve up reality in different ways, and these differences shape how speakers think about fundamental concepts like space and time. English speakers tend to think of time in terms of horizontal space, looking forward to the future, putting the past behind us. But Mandarin speakers also use vertical metaphors, the up month or down month for last month and next month. The Pormpuraaw people of Australia don't use relative directions like left and right. Instead, they always orient themselves by cardinal directions: north, south, east, west. A Pormpuraaw speaker wouldn't say the cup is to the left of the plate, but rather the cup is north of the plate. This means they must always know which direction they're facing, constantly maintaining a mental compass. Studies show they're remarkably good at this, even in unfamiliar environments. Does speaking different languages create different brains? In a sense, yes. Brain imaging shows that bilinguals, when switching languages, activate different neural networks. The language you speak literally changes which parts of your brain are most active during thought. Language isn't just a tool for expressing pre-existing thoughts, it's part of the infrastructure of thinking itself, shaping how you parse experience, how you remember, how you navigate the world. Your mother tongue has been quietly shaping your brain since infancy, creating grooves of thought, pathways of understanding that feel natural because they're all you've ever known. There exists a strange condition called blind sight that reveals how much of your brain's visual processing happens outside conscious awareness. People with damage to their primary visual cortex report being completely blind in parts of their visual field. If you show them an object in that blind region and ask what they see, they'll say nothing. But if you force them to guess, to point to where the object is, or to guess its color or shape, they perform far better than chance. Somehow, their brain is processing visual information without conscious awareness. The visual data is taking alternate routes through the brain, bypassing the damaged area responsible for conscious vision, reaching motor and decision-making systems directly. These individuals navigate around obstacles they claim not to see, reach for objects they insist aren't there. Vision without seeing. Processing without awareness. This demonstrates something profound. Consciousness is not required for sophisticated information processing. Your brain handles countless complex operations, recognizing patterns, making predictions, guiding behavior, without ever bringing them to your conscious attention. Consciousness might be just the tip of a vast cognitive iceberg, the small portion of your brain's processing that gets elevated to awareness while the majority of mental life unfolds in permanent darkness, invisible to the very mind it serves. Your semantic memory, your knowledge of facts, concepts, and meanings, is organized in ways neuroscientists are still working to understand. It appears to function somewhat like a vast, interconnected web, where concepts are nodes connected to related concepts. When you think of dog, your brain automatically activates related concepts: animal, pet, bark, fur. This spreading activation happens rapidly and unconsciously, priming related ideas before you're aware of thinking about them. This network structure means that the path from one concept to another affects how easily you can make connections. Some ideas sit close together in your mental landscape, separated by just one or two steps. Others are distant, requiring many intermediate concepts to bridge between them. Creativity, in part, is the ability to find unexpected paths through this network, connecting distant concepts in novel ways that reveal hidden relationships. And here's what's remarkable: this network is unique to you. While humans share general organizational principles, dogs are more closely linked to cats than to mathematics in most minds. The specific structure of your semantic network has been shaped by your unique experiences, your particular education, your individual interests. The connections you've strengthened through repeated use, the concepts you've elaborated through deep engagement, the associations you've built through your specific life, these have created a conceptual landscape unlike anyone else's. Your way of understanding the world is, quite literally, a unique geography of meaning. Your sense of body ownership, the feeling that your body is yours, that these hands and legs and torso belong to you, seems self-evident. But this sense can be surprisingly easy to manipulate. In the famous rubber hand illusion, researchers place a rubber hand in front of you while hiding your real hand. They then stroke both the rubber hand and your real hand simultaneously. Within minutes, most people begin to feel that the rubber hand is their own hand. They react with distress if the rubber hand is threatened. Your brain determines body ownership through multiple sources of information: visual input, seeing the hand; tactile input, feeling the touch; and proprioceptive input, sensing where your hand is. When these usually reliable sources of information are artificially synchronized, when you see touch on the rubber hand at the same moment you feel touch on your real hand, your brain accepts the rubber hand as part of your body. This reveals that your sense of self, even at the most basic physical level, is a construction, a best guess your brain makes by integrating multiple streams of information. When those streams are manipulated, your sense of self changes accordingly. You are not simply in your body, your brain is constantly deciding what counts as your body, updating its model based on incoming information. The boundary between self and world, between you and not you, is not fixed but constantly negotiated, a permeable border that your brain maintains but can also revise. While we've discussed the brain's two hemispheres, the relationship between them is more subtle than simple division of labor. The corpus callosum, that bundle of nerve fibers connecting the hemispheres, contains about 200 million axons, and these connections allow for constant, rapid communication. The hemispheres aren't separate processing units that occasionally share results, they're in continuous conversation, constantly integrating their different processing styles. The right hemisphere tends to process information holistically, attending to context and relationships. The left tends toward analytical, sequential processing, breaking things into parts. But almost every task involves both hemispheres working together. Reading this sentence requires your left hemisphere's language processing but also your right hemisphere's understanding of metaphor, emotional tone, and contextual meaning. When the corpus callosum is damaged or severed, strange symptoms can emerge. Some patients report their left hand acting independently, even working against the intentions of their right hand, one hand buttoning a shirt while the other unbuttons it. It's as if two separate centers of intention exist, normally coordinated through the corpus callosum but now acting autonomously. This raises an unsettling question. Are you one consciousness or two, unified only by the constant communication between hemispheres? When you think I, which hemisphere is thinking it? Or are both thinking it simultaneously, creating the illusion of unity? Your brain is remarkably picky about its fuel. While your muscles can burn fat, protein, or carbohydrates for energy, your brain runs almost exclusively on glucose. It can use ketones as an alternative fuel during starvation or on ketogenic diets, but glucose is its preferred energy source. This is why blood sugar regulation is so critical for cognitive function. When glucose is scarce, your brain begins making difficult decisions about resource allocation. Higher cognitive functions, the ones that make you distinctly human, like complex reasoning, impulse control, and emotional regulation, are expensive, metabolically speaking. Under glucose restriction, these functions suffer first. This is why hunger makes you irritable and impairs judgment. Your brain is literally conserving energy by reducing power to its most expensive systems. Interestingly, decision-making and self-control appear to deplete glucose more than passive activities. Studies have shown that after making many decisions or exercising significant self-control, blood glucose levels drop and cognitive performance on subsequent tasks suffers, a phenomenon sometimes called ego depletion. Your willpower isn't just a metaphorical muscle, it has metabolic costs. Each decision, each act of restraint, each moment of focused attention burns through your brain's limited fuel supply. You are, in the most literal sense, spending energy every time you think, and when that energy runs low, thinking becomes harder. Physical touch affects your brain in profound ways that extend far beyond the immediate sensation. The skin is your largest sensory organ, packed with receptors that send constant streams of information to your brain. But touch doesn't just provide information about the external world, it fundamentally affects your emotional and social brain systems. Gentle touch, particularly from trusted others, activates a special class of nerve fibers called C-tactile afferents. These fibers respond specifically to soft, slow stroking, the kind of touch involved in comforting a child, embracing a loved one, or petting an animal. They connect to brain regions involved in emotional processing and social bonding, including the insula and the orbitofrontal cortex. Infants deprived of touch show delayed development, elevated stress hormones, and altered brain development. Adults deprived of physical contact show increased stress, anxiety, and even cognitive impairment. Touch is not a luxury, it's a biological necessity, fundamental to how your brain regulates emotion and maintains well-being. In a very real sense, you need to be touched to be fully yourself. Your brain has evolved expecting physical contact with other humans, and without it, something essential goes missing, a kind of sensory malnutrition that affects your mental landscape as surely as lack of food affects your body. Your sense of continuous identity, the feeling that you're the same person who existed yesterday, last year, in childhood, is something your brain actively constructs. You're not directly experiencing your past self, you're remembering stories about that self, stories that your brain continually revises and updates. Each time you remember something, you're not accessing a stored file but reconstructing the memory, and in that reconstruction, you subtly alter it to fit your current understanding, your current identity. This is why your childhood memories often feel simpler, more archetypal than they probably were. Your brain has been retelling these stories for decades, smoothing away complexities, emphasizing certain details while forgetting others, gradually transforming messy reality into coherent narrative. You're not who you were 20 years ago, not just psychologically but literally, on a cellular level. Almost every cell in your body has been replaced. The neurons in your brain remain, but their connections have been endlessly rearranged. So what makes you across time? Perhaps it's this narrative, this story your brain tells about continuity and identity. You are the story your brain believes about itself, constantly revised, perpetually updated, but maintaining enough consistency to create the illusion, or perhaps the reality, of a single, continuous self moving through time. Your identity isn't a thing you have but a process you do, a continuous act of self-narration, your brain forever telling itself the story of who you are. During sleep, particularly during deep non-REM sleep, something extraordinary happens that we only recently discovered. Your brain doesn't just rest, it reviews. Brain regions that were active during the day reactivate in coordinated patterns, replaying experiences at high speed. If you learn to navigate a maze during the day, the same neural sequences fire during the night, but compressed in time, repeating hundreds or thousands of times. This replay appears to be how your brain consolidates learning, moving information from temporary storage in the hippocampus to more permanent storage in the cortex. But it's not just passive transfer. During this replay, your brain seems to extract patterns, identify what's important, integrate new information with existing knowledge. Sleep is when learning becomes wisdom, when experience becomes understanding. This is why sleeping after learning improves memory more than simply resting. It's why difficult problems sometimes become clear after sleeping on them. Your sleeping brain is working, processing, integrating, finding connections that your waking mind couldn't see. In sleep, freed from the demands of immediate experience, your brain can engage in what might be called contemplation, reviewing, reconsidering, understanding more deeply. The ancient advice to sleep on it isn't folk wisdom, it's an intuitive recognition of something neuroscience is only now confirming. Your sleeping brain is, in some ways, wiser than your waking one. Your brain rests now, or prepares to rest, its work continuing in ways you'll never fully witness, in darkness, in silence, in the mystery of being. Let us drift further into the depths of understanding, exploring how your brain creates meaning, connects with others, and maintains the delicate balance between stability and change. Deep within your brain, smaller than a pea and weighing less than a gram, sits the pituitary gland, sometimes called the master gland because it orchestrates your entire hormonal system. But the pituitary itself is controlled by the hypothalamus, that ancient structure we mentioned earlier. Together, these tiny regions regulate growth, reproduction, stress response, metabolism, and countless other bodily functions through the release of hormones into your bloodstream. The hypothalamus is constantly monitoring your internal state, body temperature, blood pressure, hunger, thirst, circadian rhythms. When it detects an imbalance, it signals the pituitary to release specific hormones, which then travel through your body, triggering responses in distant organs. This is why your brain, though it never directly touches most of your body's tissues, can influence everything from your heart rate to your bone growth to your reproductive system. What's remarkable is how tiny changes in these brain regions can have profound effects throughout your entire body and mind. A small tumor on the pituitary, a slight imbalance in hypothalamic function, and suddenly your metabolism changes, your mood shifts, your energy levels transform. These small structures, hidden deep in your brain's core, are the conductors of your body's symphony, their chemical signals coordinating the performance of trillions of cells, maintaining the intricate balance that keeps you alive and functioning. Your face can produce micro-expressions, fleeting facial movements lasting only a fraction of a second that reveal genuine emotions before your conscious mind can suppress them. Psychologist Paul Ekman discovered that these expressions occur universally across cultures, suggesting they're hardwired into human neurobiology rather than learned. When you feel an emotion, your brain automatically begins to configure your facial muscles into the corresponding expression. If you're consciously trying to hide that emotion, maintaining a poker face, forcing a smile when you're sad, you can usually override this automatic response. But there's often a brief moment, sometimes as short as 1/25th of a second, where the genuine emotion flickers across your face before conscious control takes over. Other people's brains are remarkably good at detecting these micro-expressions, even when they can't consciously identify what they've seen. You might feel that someone is lying without knowing why, sensing that something is off about their expression. Your brain has detected a micro-expression of fear or anger beneath their calm facade, processed this information unconsciously, and generated a feeling of unease. Your face is constantly betraying your inner state, and other brains are constantly reading these betrayals, creating an invisible layer of communication beneath your conscious interactions, a silent dialogue between nervous systems. Your brain is an insatiable pattern recognition machine, constantly searching for order, meaning, and predictability in the world around you. This is one of your brain's greatest strengths. The ability to identify patterns allows you to learn language, recognize faces, predict events, navigate complex social situations. But this strength has a shadow side. Your brain sometimes finds patterns where none exist. This is called apophenia, seeing meaningful connections in random or meaningless data. It's why you see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, why you notice that every time you wash your car it rains, why conspiracy theories can seem so compelling. Your brain is so eager to find patterns that it will impose them on randomness, creating false connections, spurious correlations, illusory meaning. This tendency is likely an evolutionary adaptation. In ancestral environments, false positives, thinking you see a predator when it's just wind in the grass, were survivable, while false negatives, not recognizing a real predator, were fatal. Your brain evolved to err on the side of seeing patterns, even if many of those patterns are illusions. You are a meaning-making machine, sometimes making meaning where none exists, forever weaving narrative from the threads of coincidence, unable to tolerate the possibility that some things simply happen without cause, without connection, without meaning. When you experience social rejection, being excluded, criticized, or ostracized, your brain processes this in some of the same regions that process physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, both involved in processing the distressing aspects of physical pain, also activate during social exclusion. In a very real neurological sense, rejection hurts. This overlap might explain why we use pain metaphors for social suffering, a broken heart, a crushing rejection, words that wound. These aren't just poetic expressions. They reflect genuine neurological similarity between physical and social pain. Evolution has apparently co-opted the physical pain system to motivate social connection, making isolation and rejection feel threatening because, for most of human history, they were threatening. A human alone was a human unlikely to survive. Remarkably, studies have shown that acetaminophen, a simple pain reliever, can reduce not just physical pain but also the distress of social rejection. Taking a pain medication can make social pain hurt less, just as it makes physical pain hurt less. Your brain doesn't categorize suffering into neat boxes labeled physical and emotional. Pain is pain, distress is distress, and the neural systems that process suffering respond to both bodily damage and social wounds. Most of your body's functions are controlled automatically by your autonomic nervous system, autonomic meaning self-governing, independent of conscious will. Your heart beats, your lungs breathe, your stomach digests, your pupils dilate and constrict, all without your conscious involvement. These functions are controlled by the oldest parts of your brain, structures that have been keeping organisms alive for hundreds of millions of years. But here's what's fascinating: the boundary between voluntary and involuntary isn't as fixed as it seems. Through training, people can learn to consciously influence functions normally considered automatic. Practitioners of certain meditation and yoga traditions can slow their heart rate, lower their blood pressure, even influence their body temperature. Biofeedback training can teach people to regulate brainwave patterns, helping treat conditions like epilepsy and ADHD. Your conscious mind and your autonomic systems are not separate kingdoms but regions with a permeable border. With awareness and practice, you can extend conscious influence into territories usually governed automatically. You cannot directly command your heart to slow, but you can breathe slowly, calm your thoughts, relax your muscles, and your heart responds. You cannot consciously dilate your blood vessels, but you can visualize warmth, and your vessels dilate. The conscious and unconscious parts of your brain are in constant communication, each influencing the other, creating your experience through their collaboration. Your brain is not a passive receiver of sensory information but an active predictor, constantly generating expectations about what it will experience next. These predictions, based on past experience, current context, and learned patterns, actually change how you perceive incoming information. You don't just see what's there, you see what you expect to see, modified by what's actually there. This is why proofreading your own writing is so difficult. Your brain expects certain words and often sees them even when they're misspelled or missing. It's why you can read text where letters are scrambled, as long as the first and last letters are correct. Your brain is making educated guesses about what's there, filling in gaps, smoothing over inconsistencies, creating a coherent experience from incomplete information. These predictions usually serve you well, allowing you to process information quickly and efficiently. But they can also trap you in perceptual prisons. Once your brain forms strong expectations about a situation, a person, or yourself, it tends to find evidence confirming those expectations while overlooking contradictory information. You see what you're looking for, hear what you expect to hear. Changing your perception of reality sometimes requires not just new information but a willingness to question your brain's predictions, to look at the world as if seeing it for the first time, without the layers of expectation that usually filter everything. The sensation of hunger isn't just your stomach signaling emptiness, it's your brain interpreting complex information from throughout your body. Your hypothalamus monitors blood glucose levels, hormones like ghrelin, which increases before meals, and leptin, which signals satiety, nutrient levels, and internal clocks tied to your usual eating schedule. It integrates all this information to create the subjective experience of hunger or fullness. What's interesting is how easily these signals can be manipulated or misinterpreted. Stress hormones can suppress appetite even when you need food. Lack of sleep increases ghrelin and decreases leptin, making you feel hungrier and less satisfied after eating. Highly processed foods, particularly those high in sugar and fat, can override satiety signals, causing you to eat beyond your body's actual needs. Your brain's hunger regulation system evolved in environments of scarcity, where the next meal was uncertain. It's calibrated to encourage eating when food is available, to store energy as fat for future shortages. In modern environments of abundance, where calorie-dense foods are constantly available, these ancient systems sometimes work against you, encouraging overconsumption your body doesn't need. Your brain is still preparing for famines that will never come, following ancient algorithms in a modern world they weren't designed for. Your visual system is constantly adapting to maintain consistent perception despite dramatically changing conditions. When you walk from bright sunlight into a dark room, you're initially blind, but within minutes you can see clearly. This is because your retinas and visual cortex are adjusting their sensitivity, a process called adaptation. But adaptation happens at multiple levels and timescales. If you wear glasses that turn the world upside down, your brain will, over several days, adapt and begin seeing the world right side up again, even though the image on your retina remains inverted. When you remove the glasses, the world appears upside down again until your brain readapts. Your visual experience isn't a direct readout of what's hitting your retinas, it's a complex construction that your brain continuously adjusts based on expectations and context. This adaptability extends to color perception, contrast sensitivity, motion detection, and countless other visual features. Your brain is constantly calibrating itself, adjusting its interpretation of sensory input to maintain useful perception across wildly varying conditions. What you see is not the world as it is, but the world as your brain has learned to represent it, based on current conditions, past experience, and assumptions about what's likely to be there. Your visual reality is perpetually reconstructed, moment by moment, a model refined through constant adaptation. When you watch someone experiencing pain, seeing them stub their toe, burn their hand, receive bad news, specific regions of your brain activate, the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, the same regions that activate when you yourself experience pain. Your brain simulates others' experiences within itself, creating a kind of resonance, a neural mirroring that might be the foundation of empathy. This isn't just metaphorical understanding, it's embodied simulation. Your brain creates a muted version of the other person's experience within your own neural tissue. You feel an echo of their pain, their joy, their fear. This is why watching someone else in pain can make you wince, why laughter is contagious, why emotions spread through crowds like waves through water. But empathy isn't automatic or unlimited. Your brain empathizes more readily with people you identify with, family, friends, members of your own social groups. Empathy for distant others, for people perceived as different or threatening, requires more effort, more conscious intention. This is the neural basis of tribalism, of in-group preference, of the human tendency to draw circles around us in them. Understanding this doesn't make it less real, but it does reveal empathy as something you can cultivate, extend, choose to practice toward those your brain doesn't automatically include in its circle of concern. Empathy is both instinct and skill, both automatic and achievable through conscious effort. Your brain has remarkable redundancy built into its architecture. Many functions aren't localized to single regions but distributed across networks. This means that if one area is damaged, other areas can often compensate, taking over functions they don't normally perform. This redundancy is part of why recovery from brain injury is possible, why the brain can sometimes heal itself in ways other organs cannot. But this redundancy comes with costs. Distributed processing requires constant communication between brain regions, which consumes energy and time. Redundancy also means that severe damage to critical hub regions, areas that coordinate multiple networks, can have cascading effects throughout the brain. Your brain is both robust and fragile, both resilient and vulnerable, its distributed architecture providing backup systems while also creating dependencies. The degree of redundancy and potential for compensation varies across brain regions and across the lifespan. Young brains, with their greater plasticity, can compensate more dramatically for damage. The visual cortex has more redundancy than the motor cortex. You can lose part of your visual field and adapt, but damage to motor areas often causes persistent paralysis. Your brain is not uniformly resilient. Some functions are more protected, more distributed, more capable of finding alternate routes when the primary path is blocked. Understanding where your brain is resilient and where it's vulnerable is part of understanding what makes you both remarkably adaptable and ultimately fragile, both powerful and delicate, both enduring and finite. And so your brain drifts onward, through this moment and into the next, maintaining itself, adapting, persisting through the continuous flow of being. As we venture deeper still into the mysteries of mind, let us explore the ways your brain bridges inner and outer worlds, how it creates understanding, and the delicate mechanisms that keep consciousness flowing like a gentle stream. Music has a unique power over your brain that almost nothing else possesses. Unlike language, which is primarily processed in the left hemisphere, music engages both hemispheres simultaneously, lighting up regions associated with emotion, memory, motor control, and even areas involved in processing mathematical patterns. When you listen to music you love, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in food, sex, and other pleasurable experiences, but it does so in anticipation of your favorite part of the song, not just when that part arrives. Your brain is predicting the music, anticipating patterns, and rewarding itself when those predictions prove correct or when they're violated in pleasurable ways. This is why music can give you chills, why a perfectly timed key change or an unexpected harmony can create that shiver down your spine. Your brain's prediction system is being both confirmed and delightfully surprised, creating a cascade of pleasure responses. For people with neurological damage, music can sometimes reach places that language cannot. Patients with severe aphasia, unable to speak or understand spoken words, can often still sing familiar songs, complete with lyrics. The melody provides a scaffold, an alternate pathway through the brain that bypasses damaged language regions. Music therapists work with stroke patients, helping them sing phrases they cannot speak, gradually rebuilding language through melody. Your brain stores music differently, more redundantly, more deeply than almost any other form of information, which is why songs from your youth can remain vivid and complete even as other memories fade into fragments. Your brain spends a remarkable amount of time not focused on the present moment. Studies suggest that your mind wanders, drifting away from your current task into daydreams, memories, plans, and fantasies, between 30 and 50% of your waking hours. This isn't a bug in your cognitive system, it's a feature with important functions. When your mind wanders, a specific network of brain regions becomes active, the default mode network. This network, which includes the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and parts of the temporal lobes, activates when you're not focused on external tasks. It's involved in self-referential thinking, remembering the past, imagining the future, and understanding others' perspectives. Mind-wandering allows your brain to consolidate memories, solve problems creatively, plan for the future, and process emotions. It's during these unfocused moments that your brain makes unexpected connections, that solutions to problems emerge unbidden, that you suddenly understand something that had been puzzling you. The mind that wanders is not a lazy mind but an active one, working on problems in the background, integrating information, preparing for challenges not yet encountered. Daydreaming is not wasted time, it's your brain investing in futures that haven't yet arrived, rehearsing possibilities, exploring alternate realities in the safe space of imagination. Every emotion you experience is accompanied by a specific pattern of neurotransmitters and hormones flooding through your brain and body. Fear triggers the release of adrenaline and cortisol, preparing you for fight or flight. Love involves dopamine, oxytocin, and vasopressin, creating feelings of attachment and pleasure. Sadness involves changes in serotonin and norepinephrine levels. Joy lights up your reward circuits with dopamine. But the relationship between chemistry and emotion isn't simple or unidirectional. Your thoughts can trigger chemical changes, and chemical changes can influence your thoughts, creating feedback loops that can spiral in positive or negative directions. A stressful thought triggers cortisol release, which makes you more vigilant for threats, which generates more stressful thoughts, which triggers more cortisol. A moment of gratitude or joy triggers dopamine and serotonin, which improves your mood, making you more likely to notice positive things, generating more positive emotions. This is why practices like cognitive behavioral therapy work. By changing thought patterns, you change brain chemistry, which makes it easier to maintain healthier thought patterns. You are not simply a victim of your neurochemistry. Your conscious choices, your deliberate practices, your patterns of attention, these influence your brain's chemical environment, which in turn influences your experience. You are both the ocean and the swimmer, both the chemistry and the consciousness experiencing that chemistry, in a continuous loop of mutual influence. Your perception of time is remarkably flexible, influenced by age, emotion, attention, and even body temperature. Time seems to accelerate as you age. Summers felt endless in childhood but fly by in adulthood. This isn't just perception, it's related to how your brain processes novel versus familiar information. In childhood, almost everything is new. Your brain is constantly forming detailed memories, processing unfamiliar information, learning and adapting. This creates dense, information-rich memories. When you look back on a period filled with new experiences, it feels longer because there's more stored in memory. As you age and settle into routines, fewer things require detailed processing. Days blur together, creating sparse memories, and looking back, time seems to have passed more quickly. This is why traveling, learning new skills, or deliberately seeking novel experiences can make life feel fuller, longer. You're not adding years to your life, but you are adding subjective time, creating richer memories that will make those years feel more substantial in retrospect. Your brain doesn't experience time directly, it constructs a sense of duration from the density of memories and the intensity of attention. Time is not something that happens to you but something your brain creates, and you have some influence over its perceived pace through the choices you make about novelty, attention, and engagement. You've forgotten most of your life. This isn't a failure of your memory system, it's an essential feature. If you remembered every breakfast, every commute, every mundane conversation, your memory would be clogged with useless information. Your brain needs to forget, to let go of the insignificant, to make room for what matters. There's a rare condition called hyperthymesia where people remember nearly every day of their lives in extraordinary detail. You might think this would be wonderful, but people with this condition often describe it as burdensome. They can't forget painful experiences or embarrassing moments. Trivial details crowd their consciousness. They struggle to identify what's important because everything feels equally vivid, equally present. Forgetting allows you to extract patterns from experience, to generalize, to form concepts. If you remembered every individual dog you'd ever seen in perfect detail, you might never form the general concept dog. Forgetting the specific allows you to understand the general. It's through forgetting particulars that you gain wisdom, that you move from memorization to understanding. Your brain is not failing when it forgets, it's succeeding at its primary task, not recording the past but preparing for the future, not preserving every detail but extracting meaning, pattern, insight from the continuous flow of experience. Your brain performs remarkably sophisticated social calculations constantly and largely unconsciously. When you interact with someone, your brain is simultaneously tracking their facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, word choice, and social context, integrating all this information to infer their intentions, emotions, and thoughts. This process, called theory of mind, is so fundamental to human social life that you rarely notice it happening. But maintaining these social models is cognitively expensive. Your brain maintains different models for different people, what they know, what they believe, what they're likely to do. The more people in your social network, the more models your brain must maintain and update. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar suggested there's a cognitive limit to the number of stable social relationships humans can maintain, approximately 150, now called Dunbar's number. This limit exists because your prefrontal cortex, the region involved in social cognition, has finite processing capacity. You can know more than 150 people, but you can only maintain complex, nuanced mental models for about that many. Beyond this number, people become categories rather than individuals, types rather than unique persons. Your brain is exquisitely designed for social connection, but even its remarkable processing power has limits. You can connect deeply with hundreds, but not thousands, a constraint that shaped human social structures for millennia and continues to influence how you experience community and belonging. Earlier, we discussed synaptic pruning in adolescence, but this process continues, more subtly, throughout life. Your brain is constantly evaluating which neural connections are useful and which are not. Connections that are used regularly are strengthened and maintained. Those that go unused are weakened and eventually eliminated. This is the neural basis of the old saying, use it or lose it. This ongoing pruning is part of why learning new skills becomes harder with age, not because your brain loses the ability to form new connections, but because it becomes more specialized, more committed to existing networks. The pathways you've been using for decades are deeply established, heavily myelinated, efficient. Creating new pathways means competing with these established routes, carving new channels when old ones already exist. But this also means that the activities you engage in, the skills you practice, the thoughts you think, these literally shape your brain's structure over time. If you spend hours daily playing music, your brain becomes increasingly musical. If you spend hours worrying, your worry pathways strengthen. You are, through your daily choices and habits, sculpting your own neural architecture, determining which connections survive and which fade away. Your brain is not fixed but perpetually revised, rewritten by how you spend your time, attention, and energy. Laughter is neurologically complex, involving multiple brain regions in both voluntary and involuntary systems. Genuine laughter, the kind that emerges spontaneously from joy or humor, originates in older, subcortical brain regions associated with emotion and vocalization. Fake or social laughter involves more cortical control, more conscious management. Interestingly, your brain can't always distinguish between real and simulated laughter. Even forcing yourself to laugh, going through the physical motions, can trigger some of the positive neurochemical responses associated with genuine mirth. This is why laughter yoga and similar practices can improve mood. Your brain receives signals from your laughing body and responds with dopamine and endorphin release, creating actual pleasure from simulated joy. Laughter is also profoundly social. You're approximately 30 times more likely to laugh in social situations than when alone, even when the humor is identical. Your brain's laughter circuits are designed to facilitate social bonding. When groups laugh together, their brains release oxytocin, strengthening social bonds. Shared laughter creates neural synchrony. Brain regions of people laughing together show coordinated activity patterns. You are, in moments of shared laughter, briefly achieving a kind of neural harmony with others, your brains temporarily dancing together, creating connection through synchronized joy. Your sense of where your body ends and the external world begins is maintained by your brain's body schema, a dynamic representation constantly updated by sensory input. This boundary is usually stable but can be extended or altered. When you use a tool skillfully, a tennis racket, a musical instrument, even a computer mouse, your brain incorporates that tool into its body schema. The tool becomes, temporarily, part of your body. Brain imaging shows that neurons in the parietal cortex, which normally respond to touch on your hand, begin responding to touch on the tool you're using. When a skilled drummer plays, their drumsticks are not external objects they're manipulating but extensions of themselves. When you've driven the same car for years, you can sense its dimensions, navigating tight spaces by feel, because your brain has temporarily expanded your body boundary to include the car. This reveals something profound. The boundary between self and world is not fixed but negotiable. Your brain determines what counts as you based on patterns of sensory feedback, prediction, and control. Anything that responds predictably to your intentions, that provides consistent sensory feedback, can potentially be incorporated into your sense of self. You are not confined to your biological body but can extend into the world through tools, technologies, even relationships, expanding the territory of self through skilled engagement with what lies beyond your skin. During times of extreme resource scarcity, starvation or severe caloric restriction, your body makes dramatic sacrifices to preserve brain function. Muscle breaks down for protein. Fat reserves are metabolized. But your brain's glucose supply is maintained as long as physiologically possible. Your body will consume itself to feed your brain. This absolute prioritization makes evolutionary sense. You can lose significant muscle mass, weight, and strength and still survive if conditions improve. But if your brain shuts down, everything ends. Your body knows this with a wisdom deeper than conscious thought. The coordination between organs, the redistribution of resources during crisis, the protective hierarchy that puts brain function above all else, these are survival strategies encoded in your physiology over millions of years. Even in less extreme circumstances, your brain's demands shape your hunger, your cravings, your food preferences. That desire for something sweet when you're mentally exhausted isn't weakness, it's your brain signaling its need for glucose. Your brain cannot store more than about 20 minutes worth of glucose, making it uniquely vulnerable to energy shortfalls and uniquely demanding in its need for constant refueling. You are, in a very real sense, your brain's life support system, an organism that exists primarily to keep this 3-pound universe fed, oxygenated, and functional. Your brain continues its quiet maintenance, its invisible work, keeping you here, keeping you present, moment after moment, breath after breath, existence after existence. As we approach the end of our journey together, let us reflect on the final mysteries of your extraordinary brain, the ways it connects you to the universe, and the quiet miracle of consciousness itself. Your brain, for all its complexity and power, experiences a profound isolation. It has never seen light, never heard sound, never felt texture. It sits in complete darkness and silence, sealed away in the bone fortress of your skull, receiving only electrical impulses, patterns of signals that it must interpret, translate, transform into the rich sensory world you experience. Every color you've ever seen, every piece of music that moved you, every face you've loved, every sunset that took your breath away, all of these exist only as patterns of neural activity, electrochemical signals your brain has learned to interpret as sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. Your brain has never directly encountered the world it so brilliantly represents. It is forever separated from reality by the intermediary of your senses, forever translating, forever guessing, forever constructing a model of a world that can never directly know. And yet, within this darkness, within this isolation, your brain has created everything you've ever experienced. Every moment of joy, every instance of beauty, every connection with another person, all of it happened inside your skull, inside this isolated organ that has never touched the world it perceives. There is something both tragic and transcendent in this, that all of existence, as you know it, unfolds in darkness, that consciousness itself is a light that shines nowhere but within, illuminating a private universe that only you will ever truly inhabit. Your brain's physical structure continues changing throughout your entire life, but the rate and nature of change evolve over time. In childhood and adolescence, change is rapid and dramatic, massive growth, extensive pruning, fundamental reorganization. In adulthood, change becomes more subtle, more focused. New experiences still create new connections, learning still reshapes neural pathways, but the basic architecture is largely established. In older age, some regions of the brain naturally shrink, particularly the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. But this shrinkage is not uniform or inevitable. Factors like physical exercise, mental stimulation, social engagement, and diet significantly influence how your brain ages. Some people in their 80s show remarkably preserved brain structure and function, while others show significant decline. The difference often lies not in genetics alone but in how those brains were used and maintained throughout life. Your brain is not a static organ that inevitably deteriorates but a dynamic one that responds to how you live. Every choice you make, to learn something new, to exercise, to maintain friendships, to challenge yourself mentally, is a choice about what kind of brain you'll have in the future. You are not just living in your brain, you are continuously building it, maintaining it, determining through countless small decisions whether it will remain flexible and resilient or become rigid and fragile. Your brain's future is not predetermined but influenced profoundly by your present actions. At this very moment, your brain is engaged in constant conversation with itself, different regions communicating, coordinating, sometimes competing for influence. Your prefrontal cortex is evaluating these words, finding meaning. Your auditory cortex is processing the sounds. Your hippocampus is connecting this information to related memories. Your amygdala is monitoring for emotional significance. Your default mode network is weaving this information into your ongoing narrative of self. These regions aren't operating independently but in continuous dialogue, sending signals back and forth thousands of times per second. When you make a decision, it's not a single region deciding but a coalition of regions reaching consensus, influenced by emotion, memory, reasoning, social considerations, bodily states. What you experience as a unified thought is actually the outcome of countless neural processes operating simultaneously, their combined activity creating the singular impression of a coherent mind. This internal democracy operates mostly beneath consciousness. You experience the results, a decision made, a thought arising, an emotion felt, but not the complex negotiations that produced them. Your conscious mind is like a citizen aware of government decisions but not privy to the cabinet meetings where those decisions were debated. Most of what makes you who you are happens in silence, in darkness, in regions of your brain you'll never consciously access, processes you'll never directly witness, creating you without your knowledge or permission. Throughout this conversation, we've returned repeatedly to sleep and dreams, and for good reason. You'll spend approximately 1/3 of your life asleep, and much of that time dreaming. REM sleep cycles occur every 90 minutes, each lasting longer as the night progresses. By morning, you might spend 30 minutes or more in a single REM period, dreaming elaborate narratives. During these dreams, your brain is astonishingly active, consuming nearly as much energy as during waking hours. But it's doing something fundamentally different. The usual boundaries between concepts loosen. The impossible becomes commonplace. Time loses its linearity. You accept absurdities without question, flying, breathing underwater, conversing with the dead, because the critical, reality-testing functions of your prefrontal cortex are dampened. Some researchers believe dreams serve as a kind of virtual reality, a space where your brain can simulate situations, practice responses, process emotions without real-world consequences. Others suggest dreams are simply random neural firing that your brain attempts to weave into narrative, creating stories from noise. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps your dreaming brain is doing many things simultaneously, consolidating memories, processing emotions, solving problems, and simply playing, exploring the space of possibility without the constraints of reality. Your dreams are your brain speaking to itself in a language only it understands, working through the day's residue, preparing for tomorrow's challenges, or simply reveling in its own creative capacity. Your brain is unique among all organs in that it knows, abstractly, that it will one day cease functioning. You are aware of your own mortality, capable of contemplating the end of your consciousness, and this awareness shapes how you live. This metacognitive capacity, thinking about thinking, knowing that you know, being conscious of consciousness, seems to be uniquely developed in humans. This awareness of finitude can be a source of anxiety, driving existential dread, fear of death. But it can also be a source of meaning, urgency, appreciation. Knowing that your time is limited can make each moment more precious, each connection more valuable, each experience more vivid. Your brain's capacity to contemplate its own end might be one of the things that makes you most deeply human, most capable of creating meaning in a universe that doesn't inherently provide it. Paradoxically, your brain cannot truly imagine not existing. Try to picture complete non-existence, and you'll find yourself imagining something, darkness, silence, emptiness, but these are still experiences, still forms of existing. Your brain, being the organ of experience, can only create experiences, even when trying to conceptualize their absence. You are trapped in consciousness, unable to escape it even in imagination, forever experiencing, forever being, until the moment when being ceases and experience ends. There is something it is like to be you, a subjective quality to your experience that philosophers call qualia. The redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the joy of joy. These subjective experiences are the hardest thing for neuroscience to explain. We can map which brain regions activate when you see red, but we cannot explain why those neural activations feel like redness. We can trace the pathways of pain signals, but we cannot explain why pain hurts rather than simply registering as information. This is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness, explaining not just how the brain processes information but why processing information feels like something, why there is subjective experience at all. Your brain creates consciousness, but how it does so remains deeply mysterious. Billions of neurons, each mindless, each following simple rules, somehow collectively generate a mind, an inner world, a felt sense of being. You are that mystery. Your existence as a conscious being, experiencing the world subjectively, feeling emotions, sensing qualia, this is perhaps the most extraordinary fact about your brain. Not that it processes information or controls your body, remarkable as those are, but that it creates experience, that it is something to be a brain, that consciousness exists at all. You are, quite literally, the universe becoming aware of itself, matter organized in such a way that it can experience its own existence. Your brain does not exist in isolation, despite its physical separation from the world. Through language, through art, through technology, through simple conversation, your brain connects with other brains, creating networks of minds that transcend individual skulls. When you read words written by someone long dead, their thoughts, patterns they once held in their neural networks, are partially recreated in yours. You are, in a sense, briefly becoming them, hosting their ideas, continuing their consciousness beyond their death. Culture, knowledge, technology, these are ways that brains collaborate across space and time, each generation building on the discoveries of the previous, each mind contributing to a collective intelligence vastly greater than any individual. You are not just your own brain but part of an extended cognitive network that includes every person you've learned from, every book you've read, every conversation you've had. Your thoughts are never entirely your own but always influenced by this vast web of interconnected minds. And now, through technology, this network is becoming more immediate, more extensive. Information that once took months to travel now moves in milliseconds. Ideas that might have reached hundreds can now reach millions. Your brain, evolved for small tribal groups, now participates in a global conversation, contributing to and drawing from a planetary intelligence that no single mind can fully comprehend. You are a node in humanity's nervous system, processing information, generating ideas, connecting what came before to what might come after. Your brain, despite its constant activity, has evolved remarkable efficiency. While it uses 20% of your body's energy, this is still remarkably little for what it accomplishes. Modern supercomputers that can barely match some of your brain's capabilities consume millions of times more power. Your brain operates on about 20 watts, less than a dim light bulb, while performing computations that would require massive data centers to replicate. This efficiency comes from billions of years of evolutionary pressure. Brains that could accomplish more while consuming less energy had survival advantages. Every optimization, every efficient solution, every energy-saving strategy was preserved and passed down. Your brain is the result of this long optimization process, a masterpiece of biological engineering that achieves extraordinary complexity on minimal resources. But this efficiency requires trade-offs. Your brain takes shortcuts, uses heuristics, relies on pattern recognition rather than exhaustive analysis. It creates illusions, makes predictable errors, falls prey to biases. These aren't flaws but necessary compromises, the cost of running a complex cognitive system on limited energy. Your brain chooses speed and efficiency over perfect accuracy, good enough solutions over optimal ones, because in the ancestral environments where it evolved, a fast decision was often better than a perfect but slow one. As we near the end of our journey, let's return to something we touched on earlier: gratitude. Your brain, for all its tendency toward negativity bias, for all its anxious scanning for threats, also has the capacity for profound appreciation, for recognizing beauty, for feeling thankful. This capacity isn't just emotionally pleasant, it's neurologically beneficial. When you practice gratitude, when you deliberately notice what's good in your life, you're not just being positive, you're literally rewiring your brain, strengthening networks associated with well-being, resilience, and social connection. Over time, these strengthened networks make it easier to notice positives, creating an upward spiral where gratitude begets more gratitude, where appreciation becomes increasingly natural. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine, and it finds what it's trained to look for. Train it to look for problems, and it will find them everywhere. Train it to look for beauty, connection, and meaning, and it will find those instead. The world contains both darkness and light, suffering and joy, pain and beauty. Your brain, through the direction of your attention, through the patterns you choose to strengthen, largely determines which of these you experience most vividly. You cannot control reality, but you can influence, through patient practice, which aspects of reality your brain highlights and which it diminishes. Finally, let us consider time itself. Your brain creates your experience of past, present, and future, but in reality, you only ever exist in the present moment. The past exists only as patterns in your neurons, memories, constantly reconstructed and revised. The future exists only as predictions, simulations your brain generates based on past experience. Only now is real, only this moment actually exists. Your brain spends much of its time not in the present, remembering the past, worrying about the future, imagining scenarios that never were and never will be. This capacity for mental time travel is uniquely human and extraordinarily useful. It allows planning, learning from experience, anticipating consequences. But it can also trap you, making you miss the only moment you actually inhabit. When you're fully present, absorbed in an activity, deeply engaged with another person, lost in the flow of experience, your brain shows a particular pattern. The default mode network, usually busy with self-referential thought and mind-wandering, quiets down. You experience less separation between yourself and what you're doing, less commentary, less judgment. In these moments, you are not thinking about experience, you are simply experiencing, and paradoxically, these are often the moments you remember as most alive, most real, most meaningful. Your brain is always here, always now, always processing the present moment, even when your attention is elsewhere. Perhaps one of the greatest skills you can develop is the ability to join your brain in the present, to be where and when you actually are, to experience this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this instant of existence, before it passes into memory and becomes another story your brain tells about the past. And so we come to the end of our journey through inner space, though your brain's journey continues, moment by moment, processing these final words, weaving them into meaning, perhaps preparing now for rest, for sleep, for that mysterious nightly dissolution of consciousness where you will dream, where your brain will process, consolidate, and restore itself for tomorrow. Your brain, 3 pounds of tissue, 86 billion neurons, 100 trillion connections, consuming 20 watts of power, sitting in darkness, creating everything, this extraordinary organ that makes you who you are, that creates your reality, that is, in every meaningful sense, you. It has carried you through every moment of your life, from your first breath to this very instant, and it will carry you through every moment yet to come. It asks for so little: glucose, oxygen, sleep, occasional novelty, and gives you everything: sensation, emotion, thought, memory, consciousness itself. Your brain is not just an organ in your body, it is the organ through which you experience having a body, having a life, having an existence at all. As you drift now towards sleep, as your consciousness softens and fragments, as your brain shifts from waking to dreaming, know that it continues its faithful work, breathing you, beating your heart, maintaining the life that allows you to rest, to dream, to wake again tomorrow. Your brain, tireless and patient, working always, asking nothing, giving everything, the silent guardian of your being. Rest now. Let your brain do what it does best: restore, consolidate, prepare for another day of creating you, of being you, of making consciousness possible. The universe inside your head continues its work, in darkness, in silence, in the eternal mystery of being.